It has come to my attention when reflecting upon the 3 analysis videos I've made on this series previously that I ramble on far too much about what the previous stories told. Because the first episode of Series 2 takes a leap into directions almost entirely different from those we saw in the first, I feel it vital to this video's structure that we don't hesitate a moment longer and dive straight into this discussion of social media, the consequences of online activity, and the potential interactions we could have with technology in the future. So without further ado, let's dissect this episode's story. The first and most obvious element to note about this episode's content is the focus on social media addiction. Now, I'm sure we all know that one person that just doesn't seem to be able to tear themselves away from their smartphone, tablet, you name it, and this kind of contemporary social media whore character is shown through Ash, played by Domhnall Gleeson. His phone distracts him from his girlfriend Martha, played by Hayley Atwell, and her attempts to get his attention. For example, she is seen standing in the pouring rain with coffee, unable to communicate with him until she bangs on the window, as well as the fact he has to put his phone in the glove compartment as punishment for this. When they get home, she asks him if he wouldn't mind eating his soup out of a shoe, to which he unwillingly agrees to. At the funeral, he is described by Sarah as a heavy user, the kind of words you would use to describe somebody's addiction to something. This addiction, therefore, is what we assume led to his death because it's never truly detailed how he died. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that it is possible to have a social media addiction myself, but I have never actually had an addiction to social media. I could choose to turn off any of my personal social media accounts without hesitation if I wanted to, but I keep it for the sake of convenience because it's easier to get in contact with people through platforms like Facebook than a shitty landline. Plus, it's also great for me to notify and update beautiful people such as yourself about upcoming videos and any other news surrounding the channel. Fortunately, this isn't the main focus of the plot itself. The parts where Ash is still alive don't even surpass the 10-minute marker for this episode. In fact, I would go as far as to proclaim that this addiction is passed on to Martha after he dies and she begins getting drawn into this new technology that could bring him back to life through all of his social media activities. This is first seen after her scan, where she drops her phone and breaks it, saying,
"I dropped you,"
where she is unable to separate the breaking of a communication device from the separation of her dead lover. Of course, she hasn't actually broken anything except the phone, but her emotional and digital connection to him is what evokes this bizarre response to her phone breaking. As she begins walking around the cliffs with the earpiece, we slowly see her becoming more socially isolated. She has been alone in that house for a long time now, and she can be seen on the cliffs with barely another human around to give her any real company. This moment with her speaking to Ash on the cliffs slightly reminds me of Spike Jonze's film titled Her, where a character interacts with an entity entirely created by a computer, just like in this episode. However, this episode has a much darker tone than the film, and the character in this episode is created through Ash's social media interactions and not created on the spot by an operating system. Even spookier though, both were released in the same year, which is interesting seeing that both Jones and Brooker were interested in the interactions with computers that could be achieved in the foreseeable future. Her interactions with her sister are almost completely minimalized too, as she becomes obsessive over her replacement robot boyfriend. She would rather hang around with a robot than having any genuine connections with other people. Is this perhaps the direction we as humans living alongside social media are headed? Does the show present us with a warning of the low amounts of genuine social activity we are experiencing in this technological age? I think the best way to answer these questions is to use the phrase, "You don't know what you have until it's gone," because Ash obsesses over the absence of his friends, which is why he turns to social media, whilst Martha obsesses over the absence of her dead lover, turning her to using the best technology available in order to fill in the large gaping emotional hole in her life. This technology spans from the subtle to something close to Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. We begin with the electronic pregnancy test, which plays a soft but almost mocking tune out loud to celebrate Martha's pregnancy. Of course, this duality between the celebratory nature of being pregnant and the father being dead bears such an emotional contrast that her reaction of rejection is a great moment indeed. The dancing baby singing a tune is almost mocking the fact she will never be able to truly let him go, as a part of him slowly grows inside her. The other side of the spectrum is this disturbing rebirth of Ash we see later on. The lighting is used to its full advantage to make this scene as grotesque as it needs to be, as the bright light of the kitchen is juxtaposed with the darkness of the bathroom, almost creeping around her in this shot here. When thinking of the general ideas surrounding birth from the baby's perspective, one might think of a white light appearing as the baby escapes the womb. bathroom. The rebirth of Ash is almost entirely different though, as he is born into a strange and damp darkness that is the bathroom. This episode then begins to explore one of the potential cornerstones in creating the perfect human robot. How do we program it to be entirely indistinguishable from another person? This is what was initially proposed by Alan Turing as he pondered the idea of whether machines could think or not. It really does sound like a science fiction trope by this point, but perhaps what Brooker is suggesting here is that striving towards this idea is futile and will only make us lonelier. This is established when Martha begins to see the imperfections of the robot. It may be programmed to be the ultimate lover through pornographic techniques, but obviously a relationship isn't just that. He is unable to truly replicate their emotional connection during everyday interactions with each other due to their conversations outside of the sphere of social media not being documented. This realization that she is actually clinging to his memory and not him is why I think she ultimately rejects him. Now we are entering the realm of ethical data usage and whether the services provided for Martha would be beneficial to a person in grief. I think when discussing this episode there is much more to it than it just being a modern view of bringing back the dead, considering all the other little details that are laid within. Let's rewind the track a bit here and go back to when Ash was alive and well on his phone. Now let's assume he's on a social networking platform like Facebook because it's one that has plenty of third-party access to the information that's transferred and inputted on the site every single day. What concerns me about aspects of social media like this is that anybody who has access to this data can read what people post, which is supposed to be private except for those you choose to share said information with. Even though you are granted a username and password, are you truly guaranteed the privacy you were promised in the terms and conditions? Possibly not. However, the show acknowledges this by challenging the ethics of online cookies. Cookies sound all fun and games on the surface, but are essentially why you might get Amazon recommending you products from time to time on your social networking feeds. It might be harmless ultimately due to the fact that it is merely recommending you products you might like, but not everybody is going to want these advertisements in their face, nor do they want their data stored and shared with other third parties in the first place. In the episode at one point, Martha is recommended she purchase some bereavement books to help her get over her loved one, even though she probably never stated that to anybody online, and can be considered a very inappropriate thing to do for somebody who is grieving. This is becoming an increasing concern for myself and many others, as we in the present are seeing many well-established websites such as news outlets bombarding the user with warnings that they're going to use cookies and hard luck if you don't like it. Now legally, all the website has to do is get the user's consent to these cookies being used, but many would rather just simply bug you to accept their terms and agreements so you don't have a giant notification at the top or bottom of the page throughout your time on their website, so naturally people are just going to blindly accept them without actually thinking what they're agreeing to. With so many people on these websites every single day, that's a huge amount of data going in and out, and God knows what they're doing with it all. All of this information that was logged on Ash therefore was held by an unnamed company in this episode in order for the technologies Martha would later invest in to work. Now presumably because Martha was in such a state of shock and grief that she wouldn't bother with any kind of research into how badly this kind of thing would get, but that's how the advertisers and businesses operate, by playing on your emotions to get you to buy their products. This obviously isn't anything new. In fact, if you have any interest in contemporary consumerism, this would be a good starting point for further reading, but this is what I was talking about in terms of the deeper plot that's beneath the story. It may on the surface look like the revival of a social media addict with relations to themes of social media and artificial intelligence, but at the end of the day, this story is about the business of helping people grieve. It's unethical and faceless, but that is because its top priority is profit alone. The company has access to Martha's DNA as she uses her thumb sign for the large package containing the robot Ash, and has successfully taken a large sum of money from her too, seeing as the final option is
not cheap,
because they were able to play on her emotions. This business technique of distorting the lines between what the consumer needs and wants is certainly explored here, seeing as she doesn't need Ash in her life, but her emotions tell her otherwise. Physically, she is able to live on her own, but with the inclusion of the robot in her house, is she any happier? Maybe, but as we see at the end, the robot has now been placed up in the attic, just like the photographs of dead brother earlier in the episode, so he essentially has become nothing more than a memory. Thanks for watching. Hook me up on Twitter at HMC_tweets or comment below where we will continue this discussion.